And now, chat, we can move on to the next part of my stream. And that part is talking about the worst movies of 2023 so far. We've come to the halfway point of the year, chat, and there's been a lot of movies released, some good, some great movies, but there's been some bad ones. There's been some stinkers, as I like to say. Either movies that I straight up hate, I do think are bad, or in retrospect, thinking about it, that were just really disappointing. Had all the resources at the disposal, and I feel like they just consistently, stumbled, even though they might have had some good moments, even great moments, Chad. And so this list incorporates movies that I think are just, terrible, bad all the way through, or just movies that I just thought were mediocre and thoroughly disappointing. But I want to go ahead and I want to start with a movie that I definitely hate. A movie that I actually forgot I saw earlier this year because I disliked it so much. That sometimes happens, chat. I mean, we definitely watch more movies than, the average person, I would say. And sometimes you'll just forget things that you just hated, or you just thought were mediocre. Like, oh yeah, and you guys had to remind me of a movie that I saw earlier, and the year did not start off very well for comedy, chat. I think one of the worst movies, if not the worst movie so far of this year, is You People, which is from Kenya Barris, chat. Listen, I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm not a fan of Kenya Barris. I don't like the way he writes. I don't like the way he directs. He comes across like an amateur to me. And the shows in which I've seen, like Blackish and what was that one show? Like I Hate White People or something. I'm just not a fan of his sensibilities as a filmmaker and his overall message. He, like, the whole premise of this movie, chat. You have Jonah Hill, who falls in love with a black woman, and they have to get both of their respective families to get along. Of course, you have Eddie Murphy, who is the father of his fiance, and then you have his family, Chad, David Duchovny, Julie Louis-Dreyfus, and it's just scene after scene after scene of people being mean to each other and just being racist and antagonistic, and I just thoroughly despised it. And I know that's kind of Kenya Barris's thing, across the board. Like I remember even watching some of his original stuff, and maybe I'm incorporating a little bit of my resentment from his other stuff, where I think he clearly has an issue with white people. But he just makes us out to be like just monsters. and it's just weird. But at the same time, by the same hand of it, like Eddie Murphy and like his family, they're just as obnoxious and as racist as Julie Louis-Dreyfus and David Duchovny's characters are. And I think it's just a thoroughly despicable film that divides more people than actually brings people together, or even has anything like something to say. I just despise it. I just really, really, really hate this movie. And the fact that Kenya Barris still consistently gets work, I don't understand it at all. It's just absolutely awful. This is gonna be a hard one to beat for me, chat, like this year. But I don't know. Maybe Kenya Barris has another movie coming out, and maybe he could possibly do it. But yeah, just a thoroughly despicable movie. Moving on from You People, the less said about that, the better. And this was a film that I think a lot of people were looking forward to. I certainly was looking forward to it. It looked like a lot of fun. His remake of The Wiz? No, absolutely not. I do not want to see. That's the last thing he should direct. That'll be the movie that will even top You People. I'm not even a big fan. I'll tell you right now, not to go off on a tangent. I think The Wiz is bizarre to me because the original musical is very different from the film. Like the original, like the Wiz, it has a predominantly black cast. But it pretty much follows the same story of The Wizard of Oz. Like the Wiz to me is just confusing. Where it's like, okay, we're going to make a movie where it's going to it's like it feels like a movie by committee that was created by white people. Where it's like, we're going to create a Wizard of Oz, except setting it in Kansas, we're gonna set it in the ghetto. We're gonna set a we're gonna have scenes in which instead of like going to the mystical forest and encountering all these weird creatures and trees that are alive, we're gonna have all the Black Wizard of Oz characters in the subway. It's like, what? It's so weird that those filmmakers just associated like, yeah, black people just live in the city. It's like there is so much material you can take, from black culture, African culture. And it's like, hey, instead of doing that, like, why don't you instead set the Wiz in a mystical version or a fantastical version of Africa, like taken from all those. That would be far more interesting, far more exciting than like, no, let's have the Scarecrow be made of trash. It's like, what? I don't understand that. That is ridiculous to me. And that's a film that indulges in stereotypes. And the original musical does not, so it doesn't make any sense. Any case. And I have a fear that's exactly what he's going to do, because that's what Kenya Barris loves to do. Anyway, moving on from that, another big disappointing film this year for me was Renfield, which is too bad, chap, because, the best thing about this movie is Nicolas Cage and Nicholas Hoult, who play Count Dracula and Renfield, respectively. And their relationship, which is an examination of a toxic relationship, is really interesting because, famously, Renfield is the familiar of Dracula, all the way from, like, Bram Stoker's Dracula to the variety of adaptations that we've gotten over, 100 years, right? And how we kind of, like, really analyze the relationship for the first time in this movie is great. And it's kind of like for that 30, 25 minutes where it does that, I think the movie's at its strongest. But then they just incorporate this unnecessary crime plot with this cartel and then you have this love interest coming in there played by Awkwafina, and Nicholas Hoult have no chemistry. It's like, when did this invade the movie? It's like, it's not necessary. Like, I feel like this could have been like a standalone 30-minute short, and you would have actually had something that was like pretty cool. But instead, they like, we gotta put in like a prototypical by the books, cop story, and it reminds me of just lazy action films from like the 2010s, like something like Stuber, where, hey, we're gonna put two people together who are very talented, like Dave Bautista and Kumail Nanjiani. But then they have to deal with a typical mob cop story. And it's just like, why is this even here? Like, you have something that's interesting with your leads, in much case of this movie, but you don't do anything with it. It suffers from the same problems all those films do. And it's too bad because the idea is really interesting and fun. It's just that for the next the additional hour of this movie is just completely unnecessary. So yeah, Renfield, which I was literally looking forward to. I thought it was gonna be fun, and the marketing just doesn't really reveal that whole mob plot, cartel plot at all. Because they literally lean into like Nicholas Hoult dealing with this toxic relationship, because that's what clearly worked. So very, very frustrating, chat. Yeah, this is too bad. One of my big disappointments this year. Another disappointment this year, Chad, and I'm at a point where I'm just like, I don't really need any more entries in this franchise anymore, and that is Fast X. Bro, vroom, vroom to the moon, family. I don't want to see this family anymore, Chad. I mean, listen, this franchise, I will always give it to it, always hand it to it. It changed throughout its entire legacy. I mean, like those original movies, like that first film, it was very much like an entertaining, but it was a Point Break knockoff. That's exactly what it was. And you had those sequels, Too Fast, Too Furious, Tokyo Drift, not very good. And then it started to reinvent itself, especially when we got to 5. And it did so in a great way. Like 5, 6, and 7 are really entertaining, bombastic, action movies. And you had these great, character interactions between, like, a lot of the leads, everyone from Vin Diesel to Jordana Brewster to, the late Paul Walker, and, to Ludacris, to Tyrese Gibson. Like, they all like, worked really well together. But I would say 7 was the last one that I thought, like, hey, this is really special. Actually, it's a great send-off to Paul Walker, who passed away in real life. And I'm thinking, like, you know what? In hindsight, that's where they honestly should have ended it. Because you had 8, which I thought was pretty disappointing. You had Hobbs and Shaw, which I like. It's probably the best of all of the ones that have come after 7. 9 I thought was okay, but then with 10, I'm just like, their whole thing is, let's just put as much CGI, bombastic, and explosions as we possibly can into this movie, and that'll make it better entertaining. And it's like it really doesn't. We've already seen crazy stunts like with these characters, but my biggest issue of this film is that because this cast is continuing to grow, they have so many characters in this movie that you don't really get to spend like any actual time with them and feel like a sense of connection or feel a sense of camaraderie between them anymore. It's like the only people that like really have any agency in this movie is like Vin Diesel, Michelle Rodriguez, and I would say Jason Momoa. Jason Momoa is like the only good thing about this movie. He's actually like a really entertaining villain, but outside of like him and the kind of, mixed performances of Vin Diesel and Michelle Rodriguez, like I'm just kind of done. And I think audiences are just done with this movie as well. It did not perform very well at the box office, and they said they're gonna make 2 more movies. They're gonna make another Rock spinoff. I'm like, I don't think they. I mean, we'll see. But if they do another film, they're gonna have to do. That budget was $350 million. All these overproduced movies, Chet, stop doing it. Okay, and this series just needs to go away. It needs to end. Maybe you can bring it back one day. Maybe start off with a smarter idea. But for right now, they have no more ideas, Chet, and it's very, very, very telling. So thank you, but no thank you. Another disappointing movie, Chad, another movie I just feel like doesn't need to exist is 2023's The Little Mermaid, the live-action Little Mermaid film. And listen, I'm just done with all these live-action remakes. Like, the only one I can truly say that I thought was great was The Jungle Book from, 2015, 2016. It's been so long. It's been nearly a decade since the movie came out. And all these remakes have just been lesser versions of their original films. Some are better than others, maybe, but they never live up to those original films. While Little Mermaid is certainly not as bad as something like Mulan or Pinocchio, or I mean, you pick your poison. It's just there's nothing about this movie that is as good as the original. Like, I think Halle Berry, she's good. And I actually like Melissa McCarthy in the movies as well, and I actually like Harvey Bardem as King Triton. However, they're just that I mean, Halle Bailey isn't Jodie Benson. Melissa McCarthy isn't Pat Carroll. The look of this movie like really bothered me. Like, where the original Little Mermaid, which I've done audio review commentary for and I've talked about in great detail, is filled with like so much color and whimsy, and like this movie just has this blue gray color palette. It's like this film, like this Vaseline's on the camera constantly. Like, why is everything so muted? Why did we have to make all these creatures so photorealistic? They look horrifying. Like Sebastian the Flounder is just like, God damn, I don't even want to look at them. And it's just like, why do this? Yeah, and they add an extra hour to this movie from the original story. Like, the original Little Mermaid's like an hour, like it's almost an hour and 20 minutes. They add like an hour and 10 minutes to this film. It's like, you don't need to add to it. It's like, it's not necessary at all. It's like, even thinking back, it's like, what did that hour and 10 minutes add to the story, to the spectacle? Nothing. It added nothing. It was unnecessary. So yeah, and again, this movie did not perform very well. I think it finally broke even. It cost $250 million to make. I think it just crossed over to $500 million, so it broke even on its production budget, chap. But yeah, another big loss for Disney. So yeah, Little Mermaid, definitely one of the most disappointing movies so far this year. Moving on from that, another film which I don't even hate this movie, but it just feels so lackluster, especially after a previous film in this franchise. But one of the most disappointing movies for me is Transformers: Rise of the Beasts. And, the Maximals, chat, those beasts, they're barely in the film. Like, listen, the Transformers franchise, live action films, mostly they've been awful. Like, the first movie, 2007, was entertaining, enough. It's like, I liked it. Again, I'm saying this as someone who didn't grow up with Transformers at all. But then Revenge of the Fallen onward, it was awful. Just terrible. Some of the worst movies made in the 21st century, in my opinion. But we had Bumblebee, and Bumblebee was like, wow, because before Bumblebee, I was like, well, people were saying like they're always complaining about what Michael Bay's missing is the heart. I'm like, what heart are we talking about? Transformers doesn't have heart. But I was proven wrong, because I saw Bumblebee, I was like, there it is. There's the heart. There's the earnestness. And Travis Knight did such a great job with that film, thinking like, oh, well, this is a great kind of new start for the franchise, chat. And it almost feels like, because that film didn't make maybe as much money. It made money. It did. But but it didn't make as much money as the original Michael Bay movies. They went, oh, well, let's kind of go back to more of the Michael Bay-isms, you know, to a degree. Not all the way, but to a degree with this next movie. And I think that's one of the reasons why it didn't do well. Also, just because it just feels tired. It doesn't feel like they capitalized on the Maximals, who are literally like in the first 5 minutes of the movie, and then they don't really come into like the last third. It's like, shouldn't the movie be focused on them? Why are they tertiary characters in their own movie? That doesn't make any sense. I hate the way they showcase Optimus, who's just mean. Like, I don't know what it is about making like just certain like leading characters like mean and fucking grumpy and like hating the fact that they're even alive. It's like that is a weird trope that's been going on, I would say, for the last 5 or 6 years. It's very bizarre to me. Like, I mean, God, there's just so little that I enjoyed about this. Even the big action spectacle, which I know a lot of people liked. I just don't really care for any of this. It's just kind of blasé. It just feels tired. And again, I think people, a lot of them felt the same way because this also underperformed. This also, I don't know if it's a box office bomb, but it certainly ain't going to be a box office success, chat. And it kind of puts the Transformers live action franchise in a very weird place. And at the end of the day, they never capitalized on the good stuff that is a part of Transformers. Like, hey, watching that Transformers G1 cartoon, the few episodes that I've seen, which is like, oh, there's a lot of material here that you can adapt and you can make a good movie. Or the Transformers 86 film, which, as flaw as it is, there's a lot of good stuff in there. It's like, you could definitely adapt this and incorporate a lot of these things and do interesting things with them and make it even better. And they just haven't done that. With the exception of Bumblebee, which I think is by far, outside the 86 film, is by far the best of the live action movies. Another big disappointment, Chad, even though everyone said, this is going to be the greatest comic book movie ever made. And it is not. I think it's one of the most mediocre comic book movies ever made, and that is The Flash. It feels like we've been talking about this movie for years, and we have, Chad. This film was announced when the original Flash TV show came out back in, 2013, 2014, Chad, 10 years ago. They've been trying to make this movie, at least this version of this movie, for 10 years. They tried to do another one of Ryan Reynolds back in the 2000s, 20 years ago. And they were actually originally going to make a Flash movie back in the 80s because of the success of the Christopher Reeve Superman film. So Warner Brothers has been struggling to make a Flash movie for 40 years. And I always go back to this. I know some people like this movie, but I always go back to this. I say, this is the best you can do. This is what 40 years of development, or at the very least 10 years of development, so much was against this movie. Ezra Miller being a nut job. The fact that the DCU has been, for the most part, absolutely atrocious ever since Man of Steel. Just the overinflated budget, the numerous script changes, the fact that we didn't even know if this movie's gonna have any connections to the future. It just had so many things wrong with it. But at the end of the day, after watching it, checks, I'm like, hey, despite all that, let's just see what you got. I just thought it was it was just a mediocre movie all the way through, from the action to a lot of the obviously the set pieces, to even the character stuff. Like, you're bringing back Michael Keaton, and outside of some action scenes, you barely use him. Like, there's so much you can do with Michael Keaton's Batman Returning, and you really don't. He's just kind of there to explain multiverse and time travel. And I'm just like, that's such a lost opportunity. And then you have Sasha Calle, who plays Supergirl, and a lot of people love her in the role. I'm like, I don't really understand why, personally, because they don't do anything with her at all. It's very confusing. And then we have some of the worst CGI I've seen in the theater since Gods of Egypt and Cats. It's on that level. It's like you spent hundreds of millions of dollars on, and this is the best you could look like. We have all these dead-eyed CGI babies, or you have these awful Easter eggs and CGI cameos of all these different DC worlds crashing into each other, and they don't look alive. They just, some of them aren't. They look dead. And it's terrible. It has its moments, has a handful of good moments, chap, but overall, I'm like, I never want to watch this movie again. And the fact that it took 10 years and this is the best you could do, give me a break. And just the whole, the marketing campaign, which is a very, different type of marketing campaign. Like, everyone coming out, all these first reactors and these critics saying it's one of the greatest comic films of all time, and Ezra Miller, he's the best, he's a great Flash. I'm just like, you guys liars. So do not like the Flash. One of the worst. And right now, the more I think about it, the more I'm just disappointed by this final movie, Chad. And Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Listen, as I said, I'm a huge fan of the Indiana Jones trilogy. Like, Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of my favorite films of all time, and my top 5 favorite movies. And like everyone else, back in the day when Crystal Skull was about to come out, I was excited for that movie. Thought it was thoroughly disappointing, pretty terrible in a lot of parts. Dial of Destiny, like when they announced they're doing another one, I was just still like, I don't know. I was unsure. Like, okay, Steven Spielberg not directing. I think that's probably for the best. James Mangold coming in after all of his, recent successes, sure. But as we just kept seeing the marketing, we kept seeing these trailers, and it just looked like they were repeating the same mistakes as Crystal Skull. Just this film being overproduced, the overuse of green screen, the overuse of CGI, the de-aging, and I'm just like on Harrison Ford's face where he looks like a dead-eyed automaton. I'm just like, I just don't know. And then upon seeing the film, a lot of my fears were actually realized, and it's disappointing because just of the legacy of those original movies. You have a film that feels impossibly bloated, has a pretty mediocre story, really horrendous supporting characters, especially with Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who's just, I don't understand, like, he's just mean. So mean in this movie, especially towards Indiana Jones, for like no reason. That doesn't make any sense. Like, why, to the point where you're trying to kill him. But she changes her mind, had to keep one movie for no inexplicable reason, and you have a pretty terrible third act. And listen, Harrison Ford, he is very good. I think he's very good, despite the material that he's given and what he has to work with. I think he's very good in the movie, more so than even Crystal Skull. And it does have some great moments, like even in the first part, which I think is overproduced, like kind of going back to that classic kind of almost Steven Spielberg setup, on the train, everything. It's like some good ideas here, and I actually liked like the very, very end where they bring in Karen Allen. It's actually a really sweet moment. There's so much about this movie that just feels like doesn't work. You bring back certain characters, you don't have anything for them to do except deliver exposition. It's like, no. I mean, what a way to end this legacy. Honestly, Chad, just thinking about it, they shouldn't have. I mean, I still to this day feel like you could do more Indiana Jones movies if you would just adhere to the sensibilities that you did in the 80s. But because the Hollywood apparatus, because the filmmaking apparatus that exists for blockbusters, I feel like that studios just wouldn't allow something like that to happen, which is sad because it can be done. It can be done. But yeah, I feel like Last Crusade should have been The Last Crusade. It should have been Indiana Jones and Sean Connery and everybody else, Sala and Marcus riding off into the sunset. Like, that's the Indian for Indiana Jones, not this. So yeah, not the worst movie this year, but certainly one of the biggest disappointments in quite some time. And yeah, Chad, that's at least at this point the worst movies, the most disappointing movies of 2023 so far. Indiana Jones, The Dial of Destiny, The Flash, Transformers, Rise of the Beasts, The Little Mermaid, Fast X, Renfield, and you people, which again is going to be really hard to beat for me this year. Kenya Barris, does Kenya Barris have another movie coming out? He might, Chad. He might. He might top himself. So, but that's my worst movies of 2023 so far. What about you guys? What did you think? What are your worst movies? What movies did you despise or thought that were really disappointed, Chad? What were the big stinkers this year? Let me know. I hope everyone enjoyed the video, and I want to take the time to tell you about my Patreon, Class in the Glass, which offers hundreds of film commentaries and video reactions to numerous movies, TV shows, and cartoons. If you're a fan of shows like Batman the Animated Series and Avatar The Last Airbender, or films like Aliens and Raiders of the Lost Ark, my Patreon is the platform for you. Currently, I'm doing a subathon to reach 75 subs on the platform. If we hit 75 subs, we'll be able to start voting on the next edited YouTube reaction, which will include actual clips and scenes from the movies and shows I comment over. Choose from such films as Fire and Ice, Masters of the Universe, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie, Mortal Kombat Annihilation, or Spawn. Subscribing at any tier level is appreciated, and feel free to give feedback at any time. Thank you again for watching the video, and see you next time.